"You bastard." The drunk driver who ran over an 8-year-old child in the rain stood there shaking, mumbling, "I didn't see anything." While the girl lay between life and death, the system looked straight at her father and said something colder than the rain itself. $50,000 first. No money? You wait. No signature. Your child keeps dying minute by minute. But just a few seconds later, in one exact moment, everything flipped. A woman walked into the emergency room, did not cry, did not ask questions, did not show pity. She slid a stack of papers toward the father, who was collapsing to the floor, and said only one sentence: "If you want her to live, sign." She was not a doctor, not an angel either. She was Sophia Voss, a billionaire widow, a CEO used to using money to extinguish crises. And that signature both saved a life and locked down the entire future of a child. If you were Jake, would you sign? If your child were dying minute by minute, would you choose to save them now, or keep the right to demand justice later? And if a system forces you to choose, who is the truly inhuman one? If this story made you angry, tight in the chest, or see yourself in it, hit subscribe now so you do not miss what comes next. And leave a comment below. If it were you, would you sign or not? Rain had covered the city since the afternoon, stretching into the night like a wet skin clinging tightly to everything. Streetlights smeared into blurred yellow streaks on the slick asphalt. At the construction site on the edge of downtown, Jake Harlan was still standing under a warped sheet metal roof, his reflective jacket darkened by rainwater and cement dust. The overtime shift had dragged on nearly an hour longer than planned, long enough to turn exhaustion into a numb ache in his body. Jake took extra work not to prove anything, but because the numbers printed on hospital debt papers had not disappeared since the day his wife died of cancer 2 years earlier. He always believed that working more could make up for what was missing, for absent dinners, for being late again and again. But that night, that very thought began to demand its price. His phone vibrated in his jacket pocket, short and urgent, as if someone were knocking on his chest from the inside. The screen showed the familiar name of the elementary school. Jake glanced at his watch, then toward the foreman standing near the time clock, head bent over a stack of crumpled papers. He walked over, his voice rough from rain and dust. "Just let me leave 10 minutes early." The words came out rushed, carrying a plea he hated admitting. The foreman did not look up, only slid the timesheet toward him, the pen tapping lightly on the empty box. "You want to pay off debt, sign. You do not sign, you leave." No malice, just the voice of someone who spoke in rules and hours. Jake stared at the line on the paper, clenched his jaw, and signed his name like pressing a pause into a life already full of scratches. He ran to the parking lot, rain stinging his face. The windshield wipers could not keep up, leaving sheets of water that broke apart and stuck back together, as if unwilling to leave. The engine roared as he hit the gas, his grip on the steering wheel rigid. Jake spoke to himself, his voice so low it was nearly swallowed by the rain. "Just let her still be there. Just let her still be there." The words repeated in his head, steady like an unconscious prayer. He did not think about accidents, did not think about anything bad. He only thought about opening the car door, seeing Lily, saying the familiar apology, then taking her home in silence. At the school gate, Lily stood huddled under a peeling awning, her raincoat torn at one corner by strong gusts of wind. The red plastic ball she held was soaked and limp, pressed against her chest like her only comfort. Lily watched each car pass by, headlights sweeping across her small face, gone pale from the cold. The teacher on dismissal duty pulled her coat tighter, her voice edged with irritation from the rain and the long wait. "Where is your dad?" Lily lowered her head, her voice so small it nearly blended into the rain. "Dad is busy." A familiar answer, but that evening it felt heavier than usual, as if she herself sensed something slipping from her grasp. The ball slipped free. Just a moment of carelessness, wet fingers opening and closing too late. It rolled off the curb, turning slowly on the oil-slick road, its red color sharp against the white curtain of rain. Lily watched it, then ran. Not out of playfulness, but from the reflex of a child who had not yet learned how to be afraid at the right moment. In her rain-blurred vision, all she saw was that red, moving away from her. Jake turned the corner at that exact moment. His headlights swept across the road, and in that brief instant, he saw Lily. He saw the tiny figure, the sudden movement. A truck horn tore through the air, long and sharp, sounding before his brain could catch up. Jake screamed, the sound breaking out raw, no longer a complete word. "Lily!" The cry dissolved into the rain, but it made his chest clamp tight, as if crushed by an unseen hand. The impact was not loud. There was no explosion, no flying debris, just a dull, heavy sound, like something hitting a hard floor. The small body was thrown, spun lightly, then lay still. Jake slammed the brakes, and the car skidded a short distance. He ran out, dropped to his knees on the icy road, his hand touching his daughter's hair matted with blood and rain. Everything inside him slowed, as if time itself had decided to abandon him at this moment. His hands shook so badly that he could not lift her right away. He called Lily's name, his voice breaking apart, but she did not answer. He finally managed to lift her, her body lighter than he remembered, limp in his arms. Lily's mouth parted. No clear breathing sound, just a faint movement that panicked him more than silence. Rain kept falling, clinging to her face, to his clothes, to the hands gripping her until they hurt. Jake ran, not looking around, not hearing the shouts behind him. Ahead, the sign of the Central Hospital appeared, glowing white in the rain. The same name he had memorized through months of taking his wife to checkups, to chemotherapy, through hope, and then despair. Jake rushed through the doors, Lily in his arms, and the moment the hospital light swallowed them both, he understood that there were places where light did not mean safety. The hospital nameplate hanging above him felt like a memory coming back to life, heavy and unannounced. The automatic doors closed behind him, cutting off the sound of rain, but not the feeling of being 1 minute late, crushing his chest. There, under the cold white lights, Jake paused for a beat, holding his child, then stepped forward into a place he did not yet know would take even more from him. The automatic doors slid apart with a short hiss, cold white light from inside, spilling out as if striking Jake straight in the eyes. Thick, sharp smell of disinfectant hit his nose immediately, completely different from the rain, asphalt, and metal outside. Jake rushed in holding Lily, his breath broken, his voice cracking before his mind could arrange the words, "My child, please, my child is not breathing." The sound rang out in the crowded emergency room, reaching the on-duty nurse like a familiar signal rather than a plea. "Put her on the gurney. Step back," the nurse shouted, her hands already reaching out, movements fast and decisive. Jake bent down to place Lily on it, his hands hesitating for half a beat as they left his daughter's body. Lily was taken away immediately, the gurney rolling across the glossy tile floor, the wheels making dry, hollow sounds. Jake followed on instinct, but other hands stopped him, firm and cold like steel clamps. He struggled slightly, eyes red from rain mixed with something else. "I am her father. I have to stay with her." His voice wavered, but no one answered that statement. Here, blood ties carried less weight than sterile space and procedure. People in blue scrubs moved around Lily like a team that had rehearsed this before. IV lines, an oxygen mask, and electrode pads were placed on her small body. Jake was pushed back toward the wall, his back hitting a surface that felt icy cold. He saw her lips growing pale, saw her chest rise and fall to the rhythm of a machine. A doctor stepped forward, his white coat marked with rainwater and stains from his gloves. He spoke quickly, evenly, like reading a familiar result. "Intracranial hemorrhage. She needs neurosurgery immediately. Every minute counts." The words landed heavily in Jake's ears, needing no further explanation. Jake nodded over and over, his throat dry. "Do the surgery. I will sign anything." The sentence burst out before fear could shape it into a polite request. The doctor looked straight at him, his gaze steady, offering no promise. "You will sign, but not just with me." With that, he turned back to Lily, leaving Jake standing there with a vague sense that he had just stepped into something larger than an emergency case. The intervention room door closed, separating Jake from his daughter with a thick pane of glass. He stood before it, seeing his own face reflected faintly. His construction jacket was smeared with mud and dried blood, looking out of place in the bright white space. In that moment, old memories surfaced before he could push them down. 2 years earlier, in this same hallway, behind this same door, his wife had been taken in and never came back out. Jake swallowed hard, his hand unconsciously clenching, as if trying to hold on to something already lost. Before he could steady himself, a man in a neatly pressed shirt approached. Not rushed, not hurried, His leather shoes made none of the urgent sounds of the medical staff around them. The man held a thin folder, wore a faint smile, and his voice was carefully adjusted. "You are the legal guardian of the patient." Jake nodded, his eyes still fixed on the room beyond the glass. "Your work insurance covers only part of the cost. To activate the specialized operating room, we require a $50,000 deposit." The number hung between them like an invisible but crushing weight. Jake spun around, his brain missing a beat before understanding. "What did you say?" The financial officer kept his tone unchanged, each word clear. "Without approval, we will continue temporary stabilization within allowable limits." Jake shot up as if shocked, his hand slamming onto the reception counter, the sound cutting sharply through the room. "She is dying. Are you even human?" A few eyes glanced toward him, then quickly turned away. The man in front of him did not change expression. "I do not make the rules. I enforce them." Jake's anger found nothing to cling to. It dropped straight onto the cold tile floor, dissolving into a hollow feeling. He turned back to the glass, where Lily lay motionless on the bed, tubes and wires wrapped around her. The monitor blinked green numbers, the heart rate line stretching out, then dipping slightly before rising again. Jake stared at it, as if by looking long enough he could keep it from falling further. Every second passing had shape, had sound, had weight pressing on his chest. A nurse passed by, speaking to a colleague in a low voice, but Jake still caught a few scattered words. "Prepare more fluids. Monitor closely." No one explained anything to him, and no one needed to. Jake understood that his daughter was being held at a fragile boundary. He stepped back, his back touching the waiting chair, then sat down without remembering when he did it. His hands trembled as he opened his phone, then froze. The contact list showed familiar names, but his mind was empty. Every thought circled back to a single point behind the glass. The doctor returned a few minutes later, speaking quickly and directly. "We are doing what we can while waiting for approval." Jake looked up, his voice now hoarse. "How long?" The doctor did not give a number. "As soon as possible." It was not reassurance, but the bare truth. Jake nodded, feeling as if he had been pushed out of the role of a father, left standing at the edge of a system, moving on its own gears. He looked through the glass again. Lily lay still, her small face nearly swallowed by the white pillow. Jake remembered that same morning, when she had complained about waking up early. He frowned when he reminded her about homework. Those images collided with the present like two unrelated worlds. He pressed his forehead against the glass, feeling the cold seep into his skin, and for the first time that night, he felt himself truly slow down. Not because he was calmer, but because there was nowhere left to run. The financial officer was still standing there, a few steps away, like a marker he could not avoid. "Do you have anyone who can help immediately?" Jake did not answer right away. He looked back at the monitor, where the green line stretched a little longer, then dipped again, a slightly slower beat, minimal, but enough for him to notice. The system was counting down, and every second passing was not on his side. Jake stood up, walked back to the glass once more, his eyes never leaving his child. The sounds in the emergency room kept cycling. Footsteps, calls, machine noise, all of it blended into a constant, restless background. In the middle of that flow, Jake stood still, his fists clenched white. In front of him, Lily lay unmoving, the numbers on the screen blinking steadily, yet fragile, like a reminder that in this place, kindness is not enough to open doors, and time waits for no one. Jake rose from the waiting chair as if pulled by an invisible thread. The glass screen in front of him still held Lily inside a cold white frame, wires and tubes covering her small body. The steady machine sounds offered no comfort. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking so badly he had to switch hands just to open the contact list. Familiar names appeared, each tied to an old memory. A drink after work, a casual promise he had never imagined needing to use this way. He dialed his cousin first, the one who had helped him fix the house after his wife's funeral. The ringing went on longer than usual. When the other end finally picked up, Jake spoke immediately, his voice breaking as if snapped in the middle of a sentence. "Can you lend me money? Any amount." There was a short silence, long enough for Jake to hear the distant sound of a television on the other end. Then, his cousin's voice slowed, tired. "Jake, I am paying off debts too. I am stuck. Jake nodded reflexively, even though the other man could not see. I understand. He hung up, staring at the screen as if something had just slipped from his grasp. The next call went to an old friend from the construction site. Jake did not circle it. The words spilled out urgent. I need money now. My kid is dying. The other end sighed, wind rushing into the microphone. My hours just got cut. I do not have any. Jake closed his eyes for a beat, listening to his heart stumble. Yeah, he said, then ended the call before it could go on. He called another number, then another. Some calls rang and dropped. Some were cut off as soon as they were answered, and some were never answered at all. The phone screen went dark after the fourth hang-up. Jake stared at it, his lips moving as if speaking to someone on the other side. Did you hear? Did you hear? The sound came out small and off-key, blending into the noise of the emergency room. A nurse ran past, her voice sharp as if thrown into the air. SPO 2 dropping. We need to increase respiratory support. Jake turned sharply, the question spilling out before he could think. How long until surgery? The nurse did not stop, only turned her head and spoke quickly. Not approved yet. Those two words fell cold and hard, like a stamped seal. Jake moved fast toward the doctor, standing near the intervention room door. He grabbed the man's sleeve, just enough force to be noticed. Please, break procedure just once. His voice was hoarse now, no strength left to shout. The doctor looked straight at him, eyes tired but firm. If I break it, they can stop the operation midway. I lost my license. Your child dies on the table. The sentence was set down like a heavy object. Jake let go, stepped back half a pace, feeling as if he had hit an invisible wall. He slid down onto the waiting chair, then kept sliding until he hit the floor. His construction jacket, soaked with rain and stiff with dried blood, pressed against the cold wall. The phone slipped from his hand, hit the tile with a dull tap. Jake lowered his head, both hands coming up to clutch his forehead, tapping it lightly, as if trying to force his mind to stay clear. The image of Lily on the gurney blended with the memory of that morning when she had eaten cereal and complained about a math test. Everything is piled together, leaving no space for clear thought. Behind the glass, Lily twitched slightly. A very small movement, but enough to snap Jake upright like an overstretched spring. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His throat locked, fear crushing his chest so hard he had to grip the chair to stay standing. Inside the room, a nurse adjusted the lines, saying something Jake could not hear clearly. The monitor blinked, the numbers changing faster, then slowing again. Time in his head no longer moved at a normal pace. The man in the dress shirt was still standing at the edge of the hallway, the folder pressed to his chest. He looked at Jake, his voice maintaining trained politeness. Do you have anyone who can help immediately? Jake turned, his eyes hollow. I am calling. The man nodded, as if he had heard that sentence many times before, then stayed where he was, present enough that Jake could not pretend to forget him. The doctor came back once more, speaking briefly. We are maintaining temporary stability. Jake clung to that phrase like a thin rope. How long is temporary? The doctor did not answer directly. Depends on approval. Jake let out a dry sound that did not quite resemble a laugh. He understood that here, time was measured in paperwork and signatures, not heartbeats. He picked up his phone again and dialed the last number in his contacts that he could think of. The phone rang twice, then stopped. Jake did not call again. He looked around the waiting area, other faces carrying their own worries, but no one seemed to see him. Everyone was trapped in their own story. Jake realized he was sitting among many people, yet completely alone. A nurse passed by again and paused for a second. We will monitor closely, Jake asked, his voice lower now. And the oxygen? The nurse nodded. Being maintained. Those two words were not a promise, just a temporary state. Jake turned back to the glass, saw the mask covering half of Lily's face, saw her chest rise with the machine's rhythm. He told himself that as long as that rhythm continued, there was hope, even if he did not know what that hope was holding on to. The automatic doors outside slid open. Another gurney was pushed in, the person on it wrapped in bandages, the smell of fresh blood spreading through the air. Jake stepped aside by reflex. Then he saw a woman enter. Black coat, rain-soaked hair, posture straight and decisive in a way that felt out of place in the frantic scene. An assistant followed, saying something, but she raised a hand to stop him. Her gaze swept across the emergency room, across Jake, across the glass door where Lily lay, as if quickly reading a situation others would take a lifetime to understand. Jake had no time to ask, no time to think, only felt the clear difference of that woman's presence. Sophia Voss stepped further into the white light, standing in the hallway like an exclamation point placed in the wrong sentence. Jake watched her, his hand tightening around the phone, while behind the glass, Lily's heart rate line dipped by one more beat. The automatic doors opened again, a short hiss cutting through the familiar noise of the emergency room. A trail of cold rain followed the woman inside, pooling on the bright tile floor. Her black coat was darkened by water, her hair pressed flat against her temples. Her face was pale, her lips dry, yet her stride remained straight and decisive, as if every step had been calculated in advance. An assistant followed closely, voice low and urgent. "You need to go to the consultation room immediately." The woman raised a hand, signaling him to stop. "Wait." One word, short enough to leave no room for argument. Jake looked up by reflex, his exhausted eyes sweeping over the newcomer before stopping. She was not like the others in this room. No professional hurry, no frantic posture of a family member. She stood there like a foreign object placed in the wrong setting. Jake looked at her as if she were from another planet, but there was no space left in his chest for jealousy or curiosity. He asked only one question, his voice hollow. "Who are you?" The woman met his gaze without hesitation. "That is not important." The answer closed every door to polite exchange. She turned her head, her eyes passing over the glass door of the intervention room where Lily lay. One glance, long enough to register the wires and the numbers on the monitor. Then her gaze shifted to the folder in the hands of the man in the dress shirt near the counter. Numbers, lines of text, a language she was accustomed to reading in long meetings. Finally, she looked at Jake. "They are selling your child's time." Her voice was calm, not accusing, not comforting, simply naming the situation. Jake did not answer immediately. He followed her gaze, looked at numbers he did not understand, then turned back to the glass. "I know." The words came slowly. "I am calling for money." The woman nodded slightly, as if confirming something she had already assumed. She pulled a chair and sat beside Jake, close enough to talk, far enough not to touch him. From her bag, she took out a thin stack of papers and placed it on the chair between them. "If you want her in the operating room now, you sign." Jake bent forward, his hand shaking as he picked up the papers. Dense lines of text appeared, unfriendly, not meant for someone running out of time. His eyes scanned them slowly, clumsily, like a blind man reading with his fingertips. Settlement, waiver, cost lock. He looked up. "What is this?" The woman lowered her voice, each word clear. "A funding agreement between my company and the hospital. It opens the operating room. In return, they want you to be silent about their part." Jake clenched the papers, the edges biting into his palm. "You are buying my silence." The woman did not deny it. "They want to make sure their part ends here." Jake swallowed. "If I sign, can I still sue later?" The question came out sharp and rushed. The woman looked straight at him. "You can still sue the driver, but your child's future compensation will be valued lower." The statement carried no threat, only cold arithmetic. Jake lowered his head, staring at the text again. Each word felt weighted. "Why?" he asked, without looking up. "Why are you doing this?" The woman was silent for a beat, long enough for Jake to think she would not answer. "Because I am used to solving things with paperwork," she said, "and because your child's time is running out. No promises, no personal story, just a reason sufficient for the moment." The assistant stood a few steps away, restless. "Sophia, the board is waiting." The woman did not turn around. "They are used to waiting." Jake suddenly recognized her name, tied to articles he had scrolled past without reading. Sophia Voss, a name from another world. He let out a dry laugh. "You do not need to sit here," Sophia replied evenly. "I am here." A nurse ran past, speaking quickly to the attending doctor. Jake caught a few broken words. "Blood pressure unstable. Oxygen is hard to maintain." He jumped up by reflex, then sank back down as his knees shook. Sophia watched, then looked back at the papers. "This is the fastest way." Jake shook his head. "Fast in exchange for what?" Sophia did not avoid it. "In exchange for you not using their part to demand more." Jake laughed, hollow. "You are talking about the future of a child." Sophia met his eyes, her gaze unsoftened. "I am talking about your child being alive, to have a future." Jake raised his hands to his face, rubbing hard, forcing his breathing steady. "You do not know my child." Sophia replied, her voice lower. I do not need to. The answer closed the emotional gap Jake had been reaching for. There was no room here for borrowed understanding. He read again, slower. Lines about medical cost settlement, liability waivers, locking compensation related to treatment and recovery. Each sentence felt like a door closing. Have you done this for many people? Jake asked. Sophia shrugged. Enough to know the consequences. Jake looked up. And you still do it? Sophia nodded. Because sometimes the beautiful choice no longer exists. Footsteps rushed from the intervention room. A doctor burst out, mask crooked, his voice stripped of its usual professional control. We are losing her. If she does not go into surgery now. The sentence was cut short by rapid breathing. Jake stood, his heart pounding painfully. He looked at the operating room door, closed tight like a refusal. Then he looked down at the papers in his hand, at the pen placed neatly on the small table beside them, black ink glinting under the lights. Sophia did not urge him. She stood and stepped back half a pace, leaving space between them. The decision is yours. Jake felt cold sweat run down his spine. He heard machines from inside, heard nurses calling to each other, all the sounds pressed together, squeezing his head tight. On the papers, the word waiver sat just below the signature line, sharp and clear, like a blade waiting to be held. Jake took the pen, his hand shaking so hard he had to grip it tight. He looked one last time through the glass, where Lily lay motionless, the mask covering half her small face. Then he looked back at the lines in front of him. Time was no longer an abstract idea. It was right here, between the pen and the paper, counting each beat in his chest. The pen lay on the low table, fluorescent light reflecting off its cheap plastic body in a thin streak. Jake picked it up, his fingers trembling so badly he had to change his grip several times to hold it steady. He did not look at Sophia anymore. His eyes were fixed on the monitoring screen behind the glass, where the timeline stretched in short segments, blinking like a bomb countdown. Each passing beat carried the feeling of something slipping out of reach. He set the pen tip to the paper and signed his name in one broken, distorted stroke, as if the signature itself had been knocked off balance the moment the ink touched. The paper had not even settled before it was pulled from his hand. The financial officer took it faster than a gurney could be moved. His tone changed instantly, less polite, more efficient. All right, activate the operating room. Jake heard that sentence, then heard himself let out a hollow, dry, off-key laugh. So, my child has a price. No one responded. Here, that statement did not require an answer. The chain of motion began immediately. Nurses called to each other, the gurney was pushed forward, and lines were rearranged. Lily was wheeled out of the intervention room, rolling fast across the bright tile floor. Jake followed reflexively, his heart pounding. The door marked "Neurosurgery" opened, then slammed shut behind the gurney. Jake ran to the red line on the floor, reaching forward. He managed to touch his daughter's foot for exactly 1 second, cold and light, before another hand stopped him. Stop here, the familiar hospital voice, no explanation needed. He stood still, breathing hard, staring at the closed door. Sounds from behind the thick metal were muted, reduced to distant echoes. Jake pressed a hand to his chest, feeling his heart beat painfully hard. Behind him, Sophia stood up. She raised a hand to her chest, her expression tightening briefly as if stabbed. The assistant stepped closer, voice worried. You need a heart check. Sophia shook her head, her eyes never leaving the operating room door. I am watching something worse. Jake heard a voice from inside slip through as the door opened briefly to bring in more equipment. Drug allergy history. The question came fast, in the tone of someone used to making decisions in seconds. Jake froze. A fragment of memory snapped into place. His wife's voice from a distant evening, mentioning a reaction to some anesthetic, said casually, like a detail not worth worrying about. He remembered how he had nodded and moved on. Now that memory returned late and sharp, like a shard of glass. Wait, Jake stepped forward, his hand striking the thick glass, his voice bursting out high and rushed. Her mother had an allergy. A nurse turned, her face tense. That is too late to say now. The answer was thrown out quickly, and the door closed again. Jake stood there, his hand still on the glass, cold spreading into his skin. He pulled his hand back, breathing hard, his head spinning as he realized he had missed something that could change everything. Inside the operating room, the rhythm of sound shifted. The monitor no longer beeped evenly. No one shouted, There was no chaos, but the entire team began moving faster, quieter, like firefighters who had just smelled smoke before the flames broke out. Jake caught scattered words through the door, short commands, dry confirmations. Each sound pulled him farther away from the role of a father who could still do something. He stepped back a few paces, his back against the wall, head lowered. The image of his signature on the paper surfaced in his mind, the trembling ink not yet dry. He thought about signing too quickly, then thought that going slower would not have left any other choice. Lily's oxygen was dropping. He had seen it on the screen, heard it in the nurse's voice. Every other reason became secondary. Sophia stood some distance away, her breathing heavier than before. She took out her phone, glanced at a few notifications, then turned the screen off. The assistant remained beside her, uneasy. "You really should lie down," Sophia replied, her voice low and firm. "Not yet." She looked at Jake, for the first time holding his gaze longer than a single beat. There was no pity in it, no comfort, only the acknowledgement that everything had passed the point of return. Jake did not return the look. He walked along the hallway, then stopped in front of the operating room door, his eyes locked on it. Another doctor appeared, speaking quickly to a nurse. Jake caught one word standing out among the technical terms: epinephrine. The word rang clearly, like an alarm bell. He stood motionless. He had heard it before, in medical stories on television, in emergency scenes that never ended well. A nurse passed by, glanced at him, then looked away. No one had time to explain. Jake understood most brutally. The operating room had opened. The door had been bought with his signature, but safety was not something that came with the purchase. A small mistake from his past, a detail he had once dismissed, had returned to bite straight into his daughter's surgery. He closed his eyes for a beat, then opened them, forcing himself to stay upright. Around him, the emergency room continued to function. Carts rolling, hurried footsteps, names of other patients being called. Other lives were still moving forward, not stopping for his fear. Jake placed his hand on the wall, feeling its cold, solid surface. He understood that from this moment on, nothing was in his hands anymore. Even though he had signed, had paid, had done everything the system required. The operating room door remained closed. The red light above it did not change. Jake stood there, clearly hearing his own heartbeat, blending with the machines inside. Epinephrine sounded again, lower this time, more urgent. He did not need anyone to speak the conclusion. He knew that the decision he had just made had opened the necessary door, but at the same time had opened a darkness he could not see through. And on the other side of that door, Lily was fighting something that could not be negotiated with paperwork or a signature. The operating room door remained tightly closed, the light above it holding the same pale red color, cold and unblinking like an eye. The hallway outside was quieter than before, left with only the steady hum of air conditioning and the scattered footsteps of night staff. Jake stood close to the door, his eyes fixed on the small window that reflected only a faint image of his own face under the lights. He stared as if looking long enough might persuade Lily's heartbeat to stay a little longer, as if his gaze could hold on to what was slipping away. A nurse stepped out, the door opening briefly before closing behind her. In her hands was another set of papers, thin but heavy in a different way. She lowered her voice enough for Jake to hear without breaking the dense tension. "In case of the worst outcome, we need a decision in advance." Jake reached out and took them, his eyes skimming the small printed lines. His lips paled, his throat burned dry. "What? Am I signing now?" The question came out slowly, as if he was too tired to be surprised anymore. The attending doctor moved closer, his face straight and worn. He did not circle it. "If there are severe complications, we may have to choose within seconds. How far do you want us to go?" Jake looked up, his eyes emptier than panic. In his mind, every scenario had collapsed into a single point. He nodded, his voice strangely steady. "Do everything." The doctor nodded back, a professional acknowledgement, then turned away, taking the newly signed papers with him. Jake leaned his back against the wall, feeling the cold seep through his jacket. The image of Lily on the operating table surfaced in his mind, mixed with machine sounds and words he had only half heard. He tried to count his breaths to keep himself standing. At that moment, the phone in his pocket vibrated. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. Jake answered, his voice hoarse. "Hello?" A man's voice came through, clear and distant. "We are the police. "We have detained the driver involved in the accident." Jake straightened, his grip tightening on the phone. And a brief pause. Blood alcohol level above the legal limit. The news did not make him shout. It fell on him like a heavy stone, pressing everything downward. Jake stood still, his eyes fixed on the wall in front of him. He asked, his voice low and slow, as if testing how long he could remain upright. "Did he see my child?" Silence for a beat, then the reply. "Unclear." Jake nodded reflexively, even though the other man could not see. "I understand." He ended the call, the screen going dark and leaving a hollow black space. Jake returned to the waiting chair, where the settlement agreement Sophia had given him still lay, the edges slightly curled. He picked it up, his eyes settling on the familiar lines. The phrase "cost lock" stood out more than the rest, like a printed curse. He understood something that had not fully sunk in when he signed. Saving today meant cutting away part of tomorrow. The accident that had just been confirmed was no longer a vague incident. It had a name, a responsible party, and a legal system waiting, and he had signed something that could suffocate that path. A figure stopped behind him. Jake turned and saw Sophia standing there, her face more tired than before, her eyes darkening as she took in what he had just said on the phone. In her hand, her phone vibrated continuously, the screen lighting up and going dark again, notifications from boards and stock movements flashing like a countdown for another life. Sophia did not speak right away. She looked at the papers in Jake's hand, then at the operating room door. The silence between them weighed more than any comfort could have. Another nurse approached, holding a thinner sheet of paper, but Jake recognized its purpose before reading. "In the worst case," she said, keeping her voice neutral, "we need your confirmation." She placed the pen down, its tip pointing at a line near the bottom. Jake lowered his eyes and read slowly. The line, "organ donation, if death occurs," sat there, clear and cold. He paused for exactly one beat, time stretching unnaturally in his chest. The image of Lily smiling tiredly at the dinner table, her voice calling, "Dad," echoed in his head like a luxury. Sophia stood behind him, not touching him, not urging him. Her phone vibrated once more, light reflecting off her pale face. Jake took the pen. His hand shook, but there was no hesitation left. The ink touched the paper, passed through his name once again, clean and final. As the signature finished, a sound burst from inside the operating room, louder and sharper than before. Code. The call was cut short, the door flying open, then slamming shut. The entire hallway seemed to hold its breath for a moment, and Jake understood that from this second on, everything had crossed beyond the boundary of an accident. Jake stood still in front of the operating room door like a shadow nailed to the tile floor. The last signature still lingered in his mind, the sensation of cold ink touching paper not yet faded. The hallway seemed to narrow, the air thickening, every breath passing through his lungs heavier than usual. Behind him, Sophia stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the paper the nurse had just taken away. The line, "organ donation, if death occurs," had just been signed, the ink still fresh, not yet fully dry. Her jaw tightened, the muscles standing out clearly beneath pale skin. The phone in Sophia's hand vibrated again, then again. She did not need to look to know who it was. When she glanced down, short lines of text appeared one after another, dry like market bulletins. Board. Urgent meeting required. Stock. Sharp drop. Each notification arrived like an offbeat heartbeat, rapid and leaving no time to adjust. Sophia turned off the screen, her hand trembling slightly, then took a deep breath to keep her chest from tightening further. The assistant stepped closer, lowering his voice, his eyes flicking toward Jake as if afraid of being overheard. "If you break the agreement, they will say you abused your authority." The words were spoken like a familiar warning, one Sophia had heard countless times in closed-door meetings. She did not turn around, only replied briefly, "They will be right." No defense, no rebuttal, just bare acknowledgement. Sophia walked to the financial counter, her shoes making soft sounds on the tile. The staff member behind the counter looked up, his expression still holding the professionally trained composure. Sophia placed her hand on the counter, her voice calm to the point of cold. Cancel the settlement, now. The man froze for a beat, as if he had just heard a request outside the script. You understand the consequences. Sophia did not look at him. Her gaze stayed on the operating room door, where the red light still glowed. I am looking at them. Without waiting for a response, Sophia pulled the remaining settlement papers from her bag. She gripped both ends firmly, then tore them in half. The sound of ripping paper was sharp and clear, overpowering even the monitor beeps leaking from inside. A few people nearby turned to look, then quickly looked away, as if unwilling to be caught in this moment. The torn pieces fell onto the tile floor, overlapping, meaningless, sand impossible to restore. Sophia took out her phone again and dialed a familiar number. When the other end answered, she spoke directly, without detours. Cut off the settlement channel. Preserve full litigation and compensation rights for this family. There was a brief silence on the other end, long enough for the listener to understand what had just been decided. Are you sure? Souris. Sophia replied immediately. Do it. She ended the call before any further questions could be asked. The assistant stood behind her, his face draining of color. You just lost the majority. The words came out like a sentence already passed. Sophia did not turn around. She knew. She had calculated it the moment her hand touched the papers. Losing her seat, losing control, losing the ability to keep bending difficult situations with money and influence. All of it was part of the price of what she had just done. She stood still, watching the operating room door, feeling a hollow open in her chest, not from physical pain, but from something else slipping from her grasp forever. Jake heard the sound of tearing paper behind him, but he did not turn around. Every sense he had was fixed forward. He did not know what Sophia had done, and he did not know what it meant. To him, everything beyond that door had faded into the background. He only felt a shift in the air, a small but distinct disturbance, as if a gear in the system had just been broken. Sophia's phone vibrated again, then again. She slipped it into her pocket without looking. For the first time in many years, she let the notifications pass without responding. She understood that from this moment on, she no longer had the power to solve everything with a signature or a phone call. The authority she had once taken for granted had just been set down by her own hand. A nurse ran past, voice urgent. Prepare more medication. A call rang out from inside the operating room, tense and higher than before. Code. The sound was cut off by the door, swinging open and slamming shut again. The entire hallway seemed to freeze for a brief beat. Sophia and Jake both looked in the same direction, though they stood in different places. The moment did not last long, but it was enough for the price of every decision just made to become clear. Sophia stood straight, her back tense, as if bracing against an invisible wave. She knew that even if Lily survived, the lives of many people in this hallway had already turned onto a different path. She did not seek recognition, nor did she expect gratitude. She simply stood there, watching the operating room door, while behind her, a world of power she once held was quietly collapsing, layer by layer, without noise, without mercy. Code rang out again, this time clearer, more urgent. Sophia did not turn away. Jake did not either. They stood there, each facing the consequences of signatures that could not be taken back, while on the other side of the door, time was being fought over with decisions that left no way out. The hallway outside the operating room fell into a strange state, not quite silent, no longer as noisy as before. Sound still existed, the hum of air conditioning, distant footsteps, carts rolling somewhere else, but everything seemed pressed down to a deeper layer. Jake leaned against the wall, eyes fixed on the sealed metal door. Time here did not move in a straight line. It broke apart, stretched, and contracted with each moment the door opened and closed. The door cracked open slightly. The chief surgeon stepped halfway out, sweat soaking through the collar of his white coat. He spoke quickly, his voice low but urgent. We are holding her, but the margin is very thin. Jake did not ask for details. He had learned that more information only meant more things to fear. He stepped forward one pace and asked just one question, his voice dry and direct. Is my child alive? The doctor looked at him for a beat, then replied, Not dead yet. Not reassurance, just a temporary marker to stand on. The door closed again. Jake let out a long breath. He did not realize he had been holding. Not dead yet meant continuing. Continuing meant more decisions. A nurse approached, holding another sheet of paper, thin but carrying the smell of ink and responsibility. We need confirmation for expanded intervention. Jake took it and skimmed the text. Lines about risks of lasting damage, long-term impairment, and irreversible outcomes. He did not ask questions. He signed. This time, the pen did not shake, not because he was steadier, but because he had nothing left to lose. Inside the operating room, a young doctor spoke quietly, tension clear in his voice. "If we are 10 minutes late," another voice cut in immediately. "Do not say if." The words were sharp and final, like a blade cutting off every hypothetical. There was no room here for parallel outcomes, only what was happening second by second. Jake stepped back, then slid down to the floor. His back rested against the cold wall, his head bowed. He placed his hands on his knees, then began counting his own breaths. In, out, in, out. The only way to keep from passing out was to force his body to do something simple. Cold sweat soaked his collar, clinging to his skin like an uncomfortable film. He realized he was shaking, not from cold, but because his body was struggling to stay upright under something beyond ordinary endurance. Farther down the hallway, Sophia stood leaning against the counter, one hand pressed to her chest. Her face was paler than when she arrived. A cardiologist approached, his voice serious, but not harsh. "You need monitoring." Sophia shook her head. "Not yet." 2 words, spoken slowly, decisively. The doctor held her gaze for a moment, then stepped back, leaving a brief gap between professional duty and personal choice. The monitor sounds from inside came through, steady for a few precious seconds. Jake lifted his head by reflex, as if his ears had learned to detect every small change. The numbers stabilized, then wavered slightly. A nurse stopped mid-step and turned toward the door. Everyone froze in that moment. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood what that instability meant. The heartbeat was being held, but by thinner threads than ever. Jake stood up, his legs numb from sitting too long. He took a few steps toward the door, then stopped at the familiar distance. He did not touch the glass this time. He knew it changed nothing. Instead, he placed a hand on his own chest, feeling his heart still beating, rough and mismatched with the fragility on the other side. Every one of Lily's heartbeats now was tied to a decision he had just signed, just accepted, just let go of. Sophia watched Jake from a distance. She did not approach. The space between them remained, not from distance, but because each of them stood at the edge of something different. The phone in her pocket vibrated once, softly, then went still. She did not take it out. For the first time in years, something mattered more than every notification. The operating room door opened slightly again. The chief surgeon appeared, this time stepping fully outside. He removed his gloves, his voice slower, though his eyes remained tight. "We are past the hardest part." Jake swallowed hard, his hands clenched. "So it is over." The question escaped before he could stop it. The doctor shook his head very slightly. "No." He looked directly at Jake, his eyes finishing the sentence. "Some battles do not end with a door opening." The door closed. The light above it stayed on. Jake stood there, clearly aware that every minute Lily was being held was borrowed from her future. He did not know what that future would look like, but he knew the price of each present heartbeat was being recorded in ink, in signatures, in decisions no one would ever call beautiful. The hallway sank back into a long, waiting rhythm. Jake returned to the chair and sat down, this time with a straighter back, his gaze fixed on an invisible point ahead. He did not pray. He had passed that stage. The only thing he did was stay, keep himself awake, ready for the next paper if it was brought out. The monitor sound inside shifted again, small but enough to make a nurse look up. Then it stabilized. Everyone exhaled at once, almost without noticing. Jake closed his eyes for one brief beat, then opened them. He understood this was not the end of this part. The door was still closed. The heartbeat was still being held by ugly decisions, and any next second could be when that price would be called. The operating room door opened fully after a stretch of time so long that Jake could no longer tell minutes from hours. The light inside spilled into the hallway, white and harsh, pulling the waiting area back into the present. The doctor stepped out first, removing his mask slowly, the gesture drawing Jake's attention more than any words. When the mask came down, a tired face appeared, the lines around the eyes deeper than usual. The surgery was technically successful. The doctor's voice was neither high nor low, as if placing something fragile on a table. Jake sprang to his feet, his body reacting before his mind could catch up. Technically, what does that mean? His voice cracked at the end of the sentence, not from crying, but from something stretched too tight finally hitting its limit. The doctor did not avoid his gaze. We controlled the bleeding and relieved the pressure, but the risk of long-term effects remains. He paused for a beat, long enough for Jake to sense that this was not yet the heaviest part. Long-term recovery. Very long. Those words landed without crushing Jake the way he had imagined. Instead, they hollowed him out in a different way. Alive. Lily was alive. That alone was enough to keep him standing. Everything else would come later. Jake nodded and did not ask more. He had learned that some questions did not make things easier. The doctor motioned for him to follow and led him down another corridor, where the noise dropped to the steady rhythm of machines. The recovery room was quieter than the operating room, the lights softer, the smell of medication different, deeper, and lighter at the same time. Lily lay on the bed, smaller than Jake remembered, as if the surgery had taken some of her weight with it. Her head was wrapped in white bandages, covering most of her forehead. A patch of hair had been shaved away, exposing pale skin. Jake slowed his steps, as if even a sudden movement might make the moment dissolve. He stood beside the bed, looking at her face. Lily's eyes were closed, her eyelashes lightly stuck to her skin from sweat and medication. Her chest rose with the machine's rhythm, steady and even. Jake reached out, touched the edge of the blanket very lightly, then stopped, as if asking permission. A nurse nearby nodded. "You can hold her hand." Jake did, her hand small and warmer than he expected. The feeling traveled back up his arm, slow but certain. Lily stirred, a small movement, then her eyelids fluttered. Jake held his breath, his entire body tightening in silence. Her eyes opened with effort, her unfocused gaze drifting across the ceiling before settling on his face. Her lips moved, and with effort, she managed to push out a faint sound. "Dad." One word, but enough to make Jake's knees go weak. He bent down, his forehead touching her hand, his breath trembling. "I'm here." He said it low and steady, like setting a marker in place. No promises, no long story, just presence. Lily shifted slightly, as if confirming the feeling was real. The monitor beside them kept a steady rhythm, a sound so simple that Jake had never found it as beautiful as he did now. The nurse adjusted a few settings, then stepped back, leaving the two of them in a small space that felt safe enough. Jake sat down in the chair beside the bed and did not let go of her hand. He looked at the numbers on the screen and understood that each one was the result of hours of decisions he had just lived through. They did not tell a story, but they existed, persistent and silent. The doctor returned and stood at the foot of the bed. "We will monitor her closely for the next 24 hours. Jake nodded. "She will need neurological therapy and physical rehabilitation." Jake nodded again. "The recovery timeline cannot be predicted." He nodded a third time, feeling that each nod placed another stone on the road ahead. The doctor looked at him, his voice slower. "Prepare yourself. Your family will not return to what it was." That sentence was not delivered as a dramatic warning. It was spoken like an obvious fact. Jake heard it, took it in, then looked back at Lily. She was already drifting back to sleep, her breathing even, her hand still resting in his. The family would not return to what it was. He did not know what the new family would look like, but he knew the old one had ended the moment the truck failed to stop. Jake stayed by the bed and stopped counting time. Outside, people still moved through the hallway, but the sound seemed blocked by the half-closed door. Sophia stood at the far end of the room, watching from a distance. She did not step closer. Her assistant said something very quietly, then fell silent. Sophia nodded, but her eyes stayed on the father and child. She had not sought this moment, but she witnessed it, and that was enough to keep her still. Jake did not look toward Sophia. His world had narrowed just enough to hold Lily, the bed, and the steady sound of the monitor. He placed his hand on the blanket and felt warmth through the fabric. In his mind, the signatures, the papers, the calls that ended abruptly slipped to the back, not gone, but no longer at the center. The doctor added a few more details about medication, reflexes, and warning signs. Jake listened and stored them in the most practical way he could. He asked only one question. "Is she in pain?" The doctor answered, "We are controlling it." Jake nodded. That was an answer he could accept. Lily shifted again, her brow tightening slightly, then relaxing. Jake leaned closer and spoke softly. "Go to sleep." He did not know if she heard him, but he spoke as if she did. The monitor kept its steady rhythm, repeating, "Simple, almost dull, and because of that, safe." When the nurse pulled the curtain, the light softened further. Jake leaned back in the chair and did not release her hand. He did not cry. The emotions would come later, or be pushed to another time. For now, he was simply there, doing the only thing he could do, staying. The doctor paused at the door and turned back to deliver one last sentence, like setting an unavoidable marker. "This is only the beginning." Jake looked up and did not argue. He turned back to Lily, her face calm beneath the white bandages. She was alive. That was enough for everything else to line up behind it and wait its turn. Morning arrived, without knocking. The rain had stopped at some point, leaving a cold, damp smell clinging to the tile floors and hospital window frames. Daylight spilled into the hallway, exposing the exhaustion etched on the faces of those who had stayed awake all night. Jake stood by Lily's bed, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes dry and burning. Outside, the city had returned to its familiar rhythm, traffic, horns, and early commuters. But inside this room, time moved differently, slow and heavy. The doctor entered with a thick file. He did not pull up a chair and spoke right away, his tone even, like reading a list he already knew by heart. Neurological therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, and regular cognitive assessments. Each item came with an estimated duration and a number. Jake listened, nodded, his eyes fixed on a single spot on the wall. Numbers followed numbers, leaving no space for questions. He asked only one. "How long?" The doctor did not give a fixed point. "It depends on her response. It could be many years." Jake nodded, as if he had expected it, as if anything was acceptable as long as Lily was still here. The nurse changed bandages and checked reflexes. Lily was awake, her gaze still hazy but anchored. She tried to lift her hand, the movement slow and heavy, like pulling something that did not belong to her. Her lips curved into a tired smile, her voice kept deliberately light. "Can I do it, Dad?" Jake bent down to her eye level. "I don't know, but we'll do it." The answer was not polished, not comforting, but Lily nodded, as if it was exactly what she needed to hear. The nurse placed another stack of papers on the table, thinner this time but no lighter. Instructions were given in order, clear and brief, like reading from a survival manual. "If you see this sign, come back immediately. If there is that symptom, call this number." Jake listened, repeated a few key points to be sure he remembered correctly. He did not ask more, did not look for shortcuts. He understood that everything ahead would be taken in small steps. Then came the discharge papers. Jake took the pen, his hand now familiar with the feel of ink soaking into paper. This signature was steadier, not because he was stronger, but because signing had become part of his breathing. He finished and slid the papers back. The nurse nodded and put them away, as if completing a routine task. For Jake, each signature still carried its own sound, but he did not stop to listen. A wheelchair was brought in. Lily was transferred carefully, slowly. She looked around, unsettled by sitting lower than everyone else's eye level. Jake adjusted the blanket, pulling it tighter around her shoulders. "Cold." Lily shook her head, then nodded, unsure which answer was right. Jake smiled faintly and placed his hand over hers. "We're going home soon, Alfred." The hallway leading to the main exit felt longer than Jake remembered. It was like another hallway he had walked through the night before, different only in light and pace. The wheels rolled over damp tiles, creaking steadily. The sound followed them the whole way, simple and rough, like a reminder that things were still operating. Jake pushed the chair, his shoulders tight, each step firm. He did not look at the signs anymore. He followed the direction he had been given. The arrows, the path already laid out. Beyond the large glass doors, the morning light was flat and cold. A few people stood smoking under the awning, coats pulled up around their necks. Jake paused for a beat to adjust the strap of Lily's bag. She looked outside and blinked. "The rain stopped, Dad." "Yeah," Jake said. "It stopped." He did not add that rain can come back, that some things do not end just because the sky clears. He pushed the chair forward a few more steps, then stopped. On the other side of the lobby, Sophia stood alone. No assistant, no phone pressed to her ear. She looked smaller than the night before, her shoulders slightly slumped, her face pale from lack of sleep. She stood near the door, as if she had been there a long time, waiting for something she was not sure would happen. Her eyes met Jake's, then moved to Lily, then rested in the space between them. Jake did not move closer. He did not turn away either. The wheelchair stood still, the creaking sound fading. Lily looked up, followed her father's gaze, then looked at the unfamiliar woman. She did not ask. Jake kept his hand on the handle, feeling the cold metal seep into his skin. In front of him was the exit, behind him the hospital, and between them a moment that had not yet been named. Sophia stood there, silent. Jake stood here, silent. The city outside kept moving, and the road ahead, like another corridor, was opening, longer and darker, waiting for them to step into it. Sophia stood near the glass doors, where the morning light fell flat and cold. The phone in her hand vibrated, a short pulse, then went still, like an unnecessary reflex. The screen lit up with a brief line that needed no explanation. "Board, you no longer hold executive authority." No greeting, no preface. A decision delivered like a shipping notice. Sophia looked at the words for one more beat, then turned the screen off. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Just 1 second. Enough to breathe out, enough to allow her body to react. When she opened them, her expression returned to neutral. No surprise, no anger. She had known this moment would come from the instant the sound of tearing paper echoed in the hallway the night before. Everything had only been a matter of time, and time, to her, had always been something calculable. The assistant stood a few steps away, phone in hand, face tight. "Is there anything we can still do?" The question was spoken softly, as if afraid of breaking something already cracked. Sophia shook her head very slightly. "Not the old way." She did not need to explain further. The old way meant influence, signatures, and calls that opened doors. Those things had just been set down by her own hand, and there was no way to pick them back up without paying more. Another notification appeared immediately. Then, another. Internal audit. Temporary freeze. Charitable funds suspended pending review. Sophia skimmed them without reading closely. She was used to understanding consequences from headlines alone. Projects, once approved in minutes, were now lines waiting indefinitely. People she had once guaranteed would now have to wait or find another path. Power, once it slipped from the hand, fell fast and clean like that. Sophia put the phone into her pocket and did not look again. She turned back toward the lobby, where Jake was pushing the wheelchair. Lily sat in it, blanket pulled tight, her head tilted slightly to one side. The wheels rolled slowly, evenly. The scene was so simple, it left Sophia feeling hollow. She realized what she had just lost was not a title or signing authority, but her most familiar ability, solving everything with money and influence. This time, there was nothing left to place on the table except her silence. Jake stopped near the door. He adjusted the blanket around Lily and bent down to say something soft and slow. Sophia could not hear the words, but she could guess the tone. Not reassurance, not promises, just presence. She stood still, watching them, and understood this was a moment she could not enter the old way, could not insert herself with an offer or assistance. She could only remain at the edge, like an outsider. The assistant stepped closer, voice low. "The press will ask." Sophia nodded. "Let them ask. Shareholders will react. They have the right." Each answer was short, not from lack of words, but from lack of need to negotiate. She had chosen, and that choice had closed a familiar road. Sophia walked toward Jake, then stopped at a distance that did not intrude. She stood there, hands loose at her sides, not seeking his eyes. Jake looked up, saw her, and stopped. There was no tension in that look, no gratitude, no resentment, only the straightforward pause of someone used to hearing one more sentence before moving on. Lily looked at the unfamiliar woman, then back at her father. "Dad?" Jake answered without turning. "Yeah." Lily fell silent, accepting that as enough. Sophia saw the small exchange and felt something close inside her. She understood that what she had done the night before did not place her at the center of this story. She was only a variable, one that had completed its function and been removed from the equation. "We cut the settlement channel," Sophia said, her voice even, without emphasis. Jake nodded, as if he already knew, or as if it no longer mattered at this point. "Thanks for telling me," he said. Nothing more. The space between them remained intact, enough that neither had to explain further. Sophia looked down at her hands, now empty. She remembered walking into meetings with thick folders, signing names without rereading. Her power had lived in very small movements, a nod, a signature. Now those movements carried no weight. The feeling was unfamiliar, but not entirely strange. It resembled the first time she lost her husband, realizing some things could not be bought back, no matter how much money existed. The assistant stepped back, respecting the silence. The phone in Sophia's pocket vibrated once, then went still. She did not take it out. She knew what it was. She also knew that even if she did, there was nothing left to do the old way. She straightened slightly, as if adjusting her posture to fit a new role, the role of someone who could no longer solve everything. Jake pushed the wheelchair forward one more step. The wheels creaked softly, a small but clear sound. He stopped and turned his head to look at Sophia again. That look did not ask and did not refuse. It was simply there. Sophia took a short breath and said, her voice slow, dry, and honest, "At least you will not have to live with, if only." The words fell between them without explanation. Jake looked at her for a beat, then nodded, very slightly. No verbal confirmation followed. Lily looked up, not fully understanding, but sensing the end of the exchange. Jake placed his hand on the handle, ready to move on. Sophia stayed where she was and did not follow. She watched them leave the lobby, the wheels rolling toward the light outside. In that moment, she understood that power had left her hands, and at the same time, another weight had fallen away. She did not know what she would do next and had no backup plan. But she knew what she had just said was the only truth left, and that truth did not need money or influence to be defended. Jake and Lily moved farther away. The glass doors opened, then closed. Sophia stood alone in the lobby, light resting on her shoulders, thin and pale. More notifications would come. More calls would follow. She neither avoided them nor chased after what had passed. She stood there, at the exact distance she had chosen, in a new role, the role of someone who had lost power and now had to learn how to live with it. Jake stopped at the threshold, his hand still resting on the wheelchair handle. He turned his head and looked at Sophia one last time. There was nothing left to say. All words had already been spent the night before, on paper, in hallways, in decisions with no way back. Jake gave a very slight nod, a movement just enough to close a connection formed in crisis. Sophia returned the look, steady and without holding on. They both understood that words now would only damage the silence that needed to remain. Lily leaned her head against her father's shoulder, her breathing steady but heavy, as if each breath needed reminding. The smell of medicine lingered in her hair, mixed with the scent of hospital soap. Jake lowered his head closer, keeping her from slipping out of that position. He felt her weight, real and alive, nothing like the hollow sensation of carrying Lily through the rain the night before. This weight was not light, but it was proof. The hospital doors opened, then closed behind them. The sounds inside were cleanly cut off, the white light fading behind the glass. Outside, the morning was damp and gray, neither beautiful nor ugly. The city continued, as if nothing had happened. Jake stood still for a beat, letting his eyes adjust to natural light, letting his ears readjust to ordinary sounds. Distant traffic, voices, the lonely sound of a bird somewhere in the trees near the entrance. Jake pushed the wheelchair toward the ramp. The wheels rolled over concrete, producing a familiar sound, even and emotionless. He heard it, and in his mind, other sounds layered over it. The pen touches paper. The monitor is changing rhythm. The word code, sisut short. Each signature rose. Every line he had read, signed, and accepted. Each signature was a heartbeat kept through ink and paper, through exchanges no one refunds. He thought about the lawsuit that would come, not immediately, but inevitably. Meetings with lawyers, questions repeated again and again, details that would need to be recalled even when he wanted to forget. He thought about therapy, packed schedules, and long sessions where Lily would be so tired she would not want to try again. He thought about the years ahead, without shape, without a complete plan, only short goals. What could be done today? What could be preserved tomorrow? That road had no clear signs, only stretches that would have to be felt out step by step. Lily stirred slightly, then lifted her head, looking around as if to confirm where she was. Her eyes were slow, but alert. "Are we going home, Dad?" The small question hung in the air like a thin thread. Jake did not answer right away. He looked at her, at the bandages on her head, the shaved patch of hair, the eyes trying to catch up with the world. He understood that home, from now on, would carry a different meaning. Not just a place, but a series of days that would have to be rebuilt. "Yeah," Jake said. "We're going home." The answer was short enough. Lily nodded, then leaned back against his shoulder, accepting it as a temporary promise. Jake adjusted the blanket around her neck, a small but precise movement. He had learned to notice details like this in just a few short hours, as if a new skill had been forced on him without room for mistakes. They crossed the parking lot. The smell of damp asphalt rose faintly. Jake opened the trunk, secured the wheelchair carefully, and then lifted Lily into the passenger seat. She felt heavier than he expected, or maybe he was more tired than he admitted. He fastened her seatbelt, checked it again, then closed the door. The sound of the door shutting was clean and familiar, so ordinary it made him pause for a beat. Jake sat in the driver's seat and placed his hands on the steering wheel. His skin was dry, with small cuts, not yet healed. He glanced at the rearview mirror and saw his own face, hollowed, older by several years compared to the night before. He did not start the car right away. He sat there, letting everything settle in a rare short pause. No sirens, no urgent calls, just the silence needed to begin again. He thought about Sophia, not with dramatic gratitude and not with resentment, just a practical thought. Decisions had been made, and those decisions had sent many lives in different directions. He knew that from now on, there would be no one standing between him and the system to open doors faster. But he also knew that some doors should not be opened that way. Jake started the engine. It hummed steadily, a sound so ordinary it was comforting. He eased the car forward, leaving the parking lot and merging into the light traffic of late morning. Lily breathed evenly beside him, her head tilted slightly toward the window. Jake glanced at her, then returned his eyes to the road. He kept a safe distance, did not rush. Every driving decision now was made more carefully than usual, as if caution had become a new reflex. As the car moved farther away, the hospital receded behind them, the large bright structure becoming part of the background. Jake did not look back. He knew some places had to be left clean to avoid being held by memory. The road ahead opened, uncertain and undefined, but it existed, and he was moving on it. In Jake's mind, the signatures were still there, not as regret, but as markers. He could not take them back. He did not try to erase them. They were part of this story, the part that saved a life and posed long questions for the future. There was no neatly wrapped ending, only consequences and the responsibility that came with them. The car turned onto a smaller road. The trees on either side were still wet, leaves trembling lightly in the wind. Jake slowed, read the signs, and followed each instruction. Lily shifted, then fell asleep again. Jake lowered the radio so she would not wake. He kept driving, slow and steady, as if every meter of road needed to be held carefully. The car moved farther into the damp morning. No background music, no narration, just a father, a living child, and a long road ahead. The signatures that could not be taken back lay behind them, like markers that could not be erased. And ahead was not a promise, but the act of continuing, day by day, beat by beat, with a price already paid and never refunded. The story of Jake and Lily is not just the tragedy of one family, but a mirror reflecting a very real reality. In life and death moments, people often do not lose because they lack love, but because they are trapped between systems, money, and time. Jake was not wrong to work himself to exhaustion, to pay off debt, and he was not wrong to sign the papers that saved his child. But the price he paid for each of those forced decisions, was a fragile future. Choices narrowed little by little until there was no longer a good path left to take. The story raises a major question for society. When a human life is priced in paperwork and deposits, who truly has the right to live fully? And how many other families are facing choices like Jake's, only more quietly, more silently? The message here is not to blame individuals, but to urge us to look directly at the system, at real, existing injustice, and at the value of preparation, protection, and speaking up before tragedy happens. Sometimes, the most painful thing is not the loss itself, but continuing to live with the question, if only. If this story made you think, please share it so more people can learn from it. Thank you for following along. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel to continue with us through powerful, uncomfortable, and very real stories about life.